Hi everyone, welcome to Module 4. I hope that you all are continuing to enjoy our content and that the structure of this class is enjoyable. Thanks for your work so far. In Module 4, we will explore the helping relationship, talk briefly about assessment and intervention strategies, and discuss working with difficult clients. To begin, let's look at the helping process. Many times I will hear my counseling students talk about how they knew that they would work in a helping profession because they have always been the person that others will go to when they are upset or when they need to talk. I know for me, I was drawn to human services early in my life. I knew by the time I was in high school that I wanted to be a helper. How about you? Have you been that person for your friends and loved ones? Most of us are drawn to this work because of our natural tendencies to offer help. What we need to remember, however, is that the helping relationship is a different type of relationship. Our clients are not our friends per se, and the nature of the relationship is one-sided. The helping relationship is one in which a skilled helper interacts with a client who is experiencing a problem. As each relationship forms, you will bring your own set of knowledge and skills to the client and offer ways to help the client move past the problem. In addition to your skills and knowledge, you will also be bringing your attitudes, values, feelings, and experiences. On the other side, the client brings his or her own set of attitudes, values, feelings, and experiences to the relationship. The client has a particular need when entering the helping relationship, and the client has expectations of what will transpire and what the outcome will be. The nature of the helping relationship is complex, as you can see. The relationship is unequal in the sense that the helper has a position of authority, and the relationship has a good bit of structure. The process of helping is sequential. First, the helper will prepare for the client to arrive. This might include removing any physical barriers and ensuring confidentiality in the office or meeting space. Preparation may also include reviewing any records pertinent to the client's case and completing any paperwork that your agency requires for new clients. Next, as the client arrives, your first responsibility will be to meet the client and establish a climate of warmth and respect. You each will develop your own style of interaction when you begin the work. We will discuss specific skills and techniques that you can use during this contact later in the chapter. As you and the client begin conversation about the reason for the client's visit, it will be important for you to keep in mind the notion of the whole person. Remember that problems don't exist in isolation. After you have identified the problem from the client's perspective, you will begin intervention strategies. You and the client will set goals and determine how to best meet the goals. Again, you will develop your own personal style with this process. The structure of the agency in which you work might impact the strategies that you use. For example, counseling agencies that provide services for children often endorse a particular method of counseling. In situations such as this, the helper would use intervention strategies that are in keeping with the agency's preferred method. The final stage of the helping relationship is termination. Once goals have been met, the relationship ends. Woodside and McClam highlight that this ideal termination does not always occur. Circumstances may change for the client or for the helper. All relationships depend on communication, and the helping process is no exception. In the helping relationship, the method of communication and the purposes of communication are different than they are in friendships or casual relationships. As you continue in your program, you will begin to explore many of the skills that Woodside and McClam introduced here. Probably one of the most important skills that you can develop is listening. I tell my graduate students that they ought to pay attention to the what of the client's message and the how of the client's message. The verbal message, or what the client communicates, is often not the whole story. What was the client doing as they told the story? Paying attention to nonverbal messages will give you a clearer sense of the client's whole experience. In Table 7.2 in your text, Woodside and McClam list several typical nonverbal messages. It might even be fun for you to start paying attention to the how of conversations that you find yourself in today. Whenever I learned about active listening, I learned from the SOLAR acronym. In this particular model of active listening, the helper faces the client squarely, adopts an open posture, leans toward the client, maintains appropriate eye contact, and remains relaxed. Again, you will develop your own style of physical behavior in sessions, and this might even change depending upon your clients and their cultural norms. When you're in session with a client, your job is to encourage the client to talk about problems and concerns. Woodside and McClam discuss the 4 dimensions of attending behaviors in the chapter. These include eye contact, vocal qualities, verbal tracking, and attentive body language. Eye contact is different for different cultures. Be sure that you have a good idea of how to interact with your clients in this regard. The way that you speak also communicates how you feel about another person. Be sensitive to this. Stay with the clients as they communicate. Tracking the client's story will be important in the immediate interaction, but you will also need to start building your mental file for this client. The story the client tells you today will also be important when the client returns for the next session. Finally, your body language is important. Remember solar and be yourself. The responses to the client are purposeful and goal-directed. You will learn many different techniques for communicating and helping relationships. Asking questions is one particular skill that can be problematic if overused. Imagine yourself in a conversation with someone, and each time that person asks a question, you offer a response, and then the person immediately asks another question. After a while, you might start to feel as if you are being interrogated. An over-reliance on questioning can hinder the helping process. In Table 7.4, Woodside and McClam list several appropriate uses of questions: to begin the interview, to obtain specific information, to seek clarification, to elicit examples of specific behavior, and to focus the client's attention. One way to avoid the pitfalls of questioning is to avoid asking direct questions. These are questions that can be answered with a yes or a no. Instead, ask questions that are open. These questions will allow the client to express thoughts and feelings and will contribute to building rapport. I imagine that many of you will work with clients in a one-to-one setting, but you will also have opportunity to work with groups of clients. Personally, I love group work. It is a dynamic process and can serve to benefit clients in ways that one-to-one sessions can't. In general, there are a number of different types of groups, and each type has unique characteristics. A couple of group formats that you might encounter as human service professionals are self-help groups and psychoeducational groups. The best example of a self-help group is Alcoholics Anonymous. Self-help groups provide opportunities for members to encourage and support one another. Psychoeducational groups are common in human service agencies. These groups are usually curriculum-driven in that there are particular learning objectives. These objectives may be education-based or prevention-based. The groups are comprised of clients with similar problems or concerns. Most of the time, clients are motivated and cooperative in the helping process. Sometimes, however, clients may be uncooperative, silent, overly demanding, and even unmotivated. Challenging clients might include those whose cultural background is different. For these clients, knowledge of culturally specific communication styles will be helpful, as will your levels of awareness and sensitivity to the client's culture. Resistance is a common issue that I have faced in my work as a counselor. If a client is involuntary or court-ordered to attend treatment, then the client may not be invested in the helping process. Resistance comes from voluntary clients too. Resistance might be seen as a signal that a topic is threatening for a client. Learning how to work with resistant clients is a challenge. Woodside and McClam provide a good introduction to the different ways to work with resistant clients, silent clients, overly demanding clients, and unmotivated clients. I've summarized their discussion on this slide. In your work as a human service professional, you will encounter people who are in crisis. This crisis might come from a natural disaster, such as a hurricane or a flood, or from an emergency situation, such as an unwanted pregnancy or even a suicide attempt. We are actually going to spend a good bit of time discussing crisis intervention during Module 4. Next week, we will break with tradition and you will all read a chapter from an additional textbook that describes one specific model of crisis intervention. Woodside and McClam describe several ways to define a crisis. It's important to remember that the crisis is the individual's emotional response to an event rather than the event or situation itself. Given that, the same event might be a crisis for one person but not a crisis for another person. The client's perspective of the event is key. A crisis might be in response to a normal developmental process, such as changes during adolescence, or it might be in response to a situational or accidental event, such as an unplanned pregnancy or a natural disaster. A crisis will develop in 4 phases. Woodside and McClam provide a good illustration of these phases in the story of Ben and Joan Matthews in Chapter 7. Your role in crisis intervention is to quickly establish rapport and an initial level of trust with the client. You'll need to have a network of referral services available to you in case the client's needs are beyond the scope of your practice. The story of Ben and Joan Matthews also illustrates many of the particular roles that you as a helper will need to fill. Again, we will discuss crisis intervention in more depth next week. In addition to crisis intervention, another common strategy for human service professionals is resolution-focused brief therapy. In fact, I imagine that this particular skill set is one in which you will use frequently. In this approach, relationship building takes place first, as establishing a climate of safety will be critical to the success of the interventions. During this process, focus on identifying client strengths. What has the client done in the past to successfully solve problems? Identifying client strengths is important in that the helper will want to know what the client has tried so far in regards to this problem. Next, the helper will work with the client to identify goals. Once goals have been defined, then the helper and the client come up with a plan for meeting the goals. That's it for Chapter 7. Next week, your assigned reading is located in your Blackboard shell. Some of the content in this chapter may feel repetitive, but I believe that having multiple perspectives of this very important skill set is beneficial. Please let me know if you have difficulty accessing the file, and I will be sure that you get a copy.